She went to care for the man they called a monster, and found he only wanted forgiveness. The door creaked open like a confession waiting to be heard. Elena's breath caught in her throat as her eyes adjusted to the dim light filtering through heavy curtains. The room smelled of antiseptic and something deeper, something like despair left to ferment in silence. In the corner, barely visible, sat a man. His silhouette was rigid, unmoving, as if he'd become part of the shadows themselves. She could see the scars now. They crawled up his neck like vines of regret, disappearing beneath the collar of his shirt. His hands, gnarled and damaged, rested on his knees. He didn't look at her, not at first. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Then his voice cut through the darkness, low, rough, like gravel scraped across stone. "Everyone comes to judge me. What did you come for?" Elena's fingers tightened around her medical bag. She swallowed hard, forcing steadiness into her voice. "To care for you." His head turned slowly. In the sliver of light that touched his face, she saw his eyes. Hollow, haunted, searching. Not the eyes of a monster, the eyes of a man who had long ago stopped believing he deserved mercy. She went to care for the man they called a monster, and found he only wanted forgiveness. Elena Mirren had learned to recognize broken things. At 34, she carried her own fractures quietly, invisible cracks that ran deep through her sense of self, her belief in justice, her faith that doing the right thing mattered. 6 months ago, she'd been escorted out of St. Catherine's Hospital with nothing but a cardboard box and a reputation in ruins, a medication error, a patient's death, an investigation that pointed fingers at the most convenient target. She was innocent. No one cared. Now she lived in a rented room above a bakery, surviving on temporary nursing assignments that paid cash and asked no questions. When the agency called about a private care position in Ashwood Manor, isolated, long-term, well-paid, she should have asked more questions. But desperation has a way of silencing caution. "The patient," the coordinator had said carefully, "has a difficult reputation. Adrian Hale, you may have heard of him." She had. Everyone had. The fire, the deaths. The man the newspapers called a monster, who walked free on technicalities. Elena accepted anyway, because somewhere beneath her own ruins, she still believed in something foolish and stubborn, that everyone deserves someone who sees their humanity, even monsters. Before we continue, tell me in the comments, what city and country are you watching from? I'd love to know how far these emotional stories are reaching. The taxi dropped her at the iron gates, just as dusk began to swallow the light. Ashwood Manor rose from the hillside like a monument to grief, all Gothic architecture and weathered stone, surrounded by gardens that had been beautiful once, but now sprawled wild and untended. The kind of place where nature reclaims what humans have abandoned. The kind of place where secrets grow like weeds. Eleanor pulled her coat tighter against the October wind and walked up the gravel path. Each step crunched too loudly in the stillness. No birds sang here. No children played in the distance. Just the sound of wind through dying leaves and her own heartbeat drumming against her ribs. The front door opened before she could knock. The woman who stood in the doorway was perhaps 60, with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun, and eyes that had forgotten how to trust. She wore a black dress that seemed more appropriate for a funeral than housekeeping. "Miss Mirren?" Her voice was clipped, efficient. "Yes, I'm the new. I know who you are." The woman stepped aside. "I'm Mrs. Calloway. I manage the household. Come in." The interior matched the exterior. Grand but neglected, beautiful but suffocating. Dark wood panels, heavy curtains, furniture covered in white sheets like corpses waiting to be identified. Every surface wore a fine layer of dust that caught the weak light from the chandelier. Mrs. Calloway moved through the house with practiced silence, and Eleanor followed. Their footsteps echoed in the emptiness. "Mr. Hale occupies the east wing," Mrs. Calloway said without turning. "He prefers minimal disturbance. Meals are delivered to his room. Medical supplies are stocked in the bathroom adjacent to his quarters. You'll find everything you need." "How long has he been like this? Isolated, I mean." "Since it happened." Mrs. Calloway stopped at the base of a grand staircase. 5 years. 5 years alone with guilt, or anger, or whatever emotion drives a man to become a ghost in his own home. "What should I know about him?" Elena asked. "Medically, behaviorally." Mrs. Calloway's expression hardened. "He's difficult. He refuses most treatments. He doesn't like to be touched. He doesn't like to be seen. 3 nurses before you quit within a week. Why? Because monsters frighten people, Miss Mirren. even the ones who claim to be professionals. The words hung between them like an accusation. "I'm not here to be frightened," Elena said quietly. "I'm here to help." Mrs. Calloway studied her for a long moment, something almost like pity flickering in her eyes. "We'll see how long that lasts." She gestured toward the stairs. "East wing, second floor, last door on the right. He knows you're coming." Eleanor climbed the stairs alone. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the house itself was trying to turn her back. The second-floor hallway stretched into shadow, illuminated only by weak sconces that cast more darkness than light. The walls were lined with portraits, family members, she assumed. A beautiful woman with kind eyes, a young boy with his father's strong jaw. All of them looked happy. All of them were gone. She reached the last door on the right. Solid oak. No nameplate. No indication of who lived behind it except the weight of the silence that pressed against it from the other side. Eleanor raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was she afraid of? She'd cared for difficult patients before. Aggressive ones, violent ones. Men who'd done terrible things. But this felt different. This felt personal in a way she couldn't explain. She knocked. 3 soft raps. No answer. She knocked again. "Mr. Hale? My name is Elena Mirren. I'm your new nurse." Silence. She tried the handle. It turned. The door opened with a low groan. The room beyond was dark, curtains drawn tight against the dying day. The air was thick, stale. A single lamp burned in the far corner, casting everything in amber shadow. She could make out the shapes of furniture. A bed, a chair, a desk covered in papers. But no movement, no sign of life. "Mr. Hale, lock the door behind you." His voice came from the darkness near the window. Deep, raw, like something scraped from the bottom of a well. Elena's heart jumped, but she steadied herself. She stepped inside and closed the door, though she didn't lock it. "I'm here to help you," she said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline singing through her veins. "I know you've been in pain. I know you've been alone, but I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to care for you." A figure moved in the shadows. He stood slowly, as if each movement cost him something. When he stepped into the weak light, she saw him clearly for the first time. Adrian Hale was perhaps 45, but he looked older, worn down by suffering and isolation. The scars she'd glimpsed before were worse than she'd imagined. They consumed the left side of his face and neck, angry red tissue that had healed badly. His left hand was similarly damaged, the fingers curled and stiff. He wore dark clothes that hung loose on a frame that had once been powerful but was now gaunt. But it was his eyes that struck her most. Dark, bottomless, alive with a pain that had nothing to do with physical injury. "You think you're different," he said, his voice hollow. "How you think you won't run? They all think that at first. I'm not running. Everyone runs eventually, Miss Mirren, when they realize what I am." "And what are you?" He smiled bitterly. "A monster. Didn't they tell you?" Eleanor set her medical bag down and took a careful step forward. "They told me a lot of things. I'd rather hear your version." "My version?" He laughed, a sound without humor. "My version died in the fire with them." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Elena felt the weight of his words, the absolute finality in his tone. "I'm not leaving," she said again, firmer this time. Adrian stared at her for a long moment. Then he turned back to the window, his scarred profile silhouetted against the dying light. "Then you're a fool. The first week was war. Not the loud kind. No shouting, no violence, no dramatic confrontations. It was the quiet, grinding war of wills between someone who wanted to heal and someone who believed he deserved to suffer. Adrian refused everything. Morning medications, physical therapy, even basic hygiene. He sat in his room like a statue of grief, staring at nothing, speaking only to push her away. "I don't need your help. Leave me alone. Why are you still here?" Elena learned to work in silence. She'd enter his room with supplies, set them down and wait. Sometimes he'd tolerate her presence for 5 minutes, sometimes 5 seconds. She didn't force anything, she just stayed. On the third day she brought breakfast and found him standing at the window, his damaged hand pressed against the glass. "It's raining," he said quietly. "Yes, I used to love the rain." He didn't turn. "Now I just hear screaming in it." Elena set the tray down carefully. "Trauma does that. Changes how we experience the world. You don't know anything about trauma." She could have told him then. About the hospital, about the patient who died, about the investigation that destroyed her career and nearly destroyed her entirely. But this wasn't about her. "Maybe not," she said, "but I know about pain." He turned slightly, enough that she could see his profile, the ruined landscape of his face. This, he gestured to his scars. This isn't pain. This is payment. For what? For being alive when they're not. The words landed like stones in still water, rippling outward into all the spaces they didn't discuss. Mr. Hale, Adrian, his voice was sharp. If you're going to witness my decay, at least use my name. Adrian, she let the name settle between them. Your scars need proper care. They're infected in places. If you'd let me... No, it must hurt. Good. Eleanor felt frustration rise in her throat, but she pushed it down. She'd dealt with self-destructive patients before. This was different only in degree, not in kind. I'm leaving the supplies here, she said. If you change your mind. She turned to go. Why? She paused at the door. Why what? Why do you keep coming back? 3 nurses quit. Mrs. Calloway says I'm impossible. You could leave tomorrow and no one would blame you. So why are you still here? Eleanor looked back at him. In the grey morning light, he looked less like a monster and more like what he actually was, a man drowning in guilt and desperate for someone to stop trying to save him. Because I don't believe in impossible people, she said quietly. I believe in people who are in impossible pain. Something flickered in his eyes, not hope, not yet, but maybe the ghost of it, a memory of what hope once felt like. He didn't respond, just turned back to the window. But when Elena came back an hour later to collect the tray, she found it empty, and the bandage supplies she'd left had been moved. It was Thursday when everything changed. Elena entered Adrian's room for the afternoon session and found him sitting on the edge of his bed, his damaged hand cradled in his lap. His face was pale, jaw clenched. What happened? She crossed the room quickly. Nothing. You're in pain. I'm always in pain. She knelt in front of him, professional instinct overriding his protests. Let me see. Don't. But she'd already taken his hand, gently, carefully. The scar tissue was hot to the touch, inflamed. One of the fingers showed signs of serious infection. This needs immediate treatment, she said, looking up at him. If it gets worse, you could lose mobility you still have. Or worse. Maybe I should. Stop it. Her voice came out sharper than intended. Stop punishing yourself through your body. Whatever you think you deserve, infection and disability aren't. You don't know what I deserve. He pulled his hand away violently, standing so fast she had to catch herself from falling. You come in here every day with your kind eyes and your gentle voice and your belief that everyone can be saved, but you don't know anything about me. You don't know what I've done, what I've caused, what I... His voice broke. He turned away, his shoulders shaking. Elena stood slowly. She should leave, give him space. That's what the textbooks would say. Instead, she stayed. You're right, she said quietly. I don't know your full story. You haven't told me, but I know pain when I see it. And I know that whatever happened, whatever you think makes you a monster, carrying it like this, alone in the dark, destroying yourself inch by inch, that's not justice. That's just slow suicide. Maybe that's what I want. I don't believe you. He spun to face her, his expression raw with anguish. Why? Why don't you believe me? You don't even know me. Because if you wanted to die, you'd be dead already. Elena held his gaze. You're not trying to die, Adrian. You're trying to disappear. There's a difference. The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier, fuller, pregnant with things unsaid. Adrian sank back onto the bed, his damaged hand clutched to his chest. When he spoke again, his voice was barely a whisper. They say I killed them. My wife, my son. They say the fire was my fault. Was it? He looked at her with eyes so full of agony, she felt it in her own chest. I don't know anymore. I've told the story so many times, believed it so completely, that the truth and the lie have merged. All I know is they're gone, and I'm here, and nothing I do will ever change that. Eleanor moved slowly, carefully, until she was sitting beside him on the bed. Not touching, just present. Let me treat your hand, she said softly. Not because you deserve it or don't deserve it, just because it needs to be done. And then, if you want, you can tell me what really happened. Adrian was quiet for so long she thought he'd refuse again. Then, slowly, he extended his hand. His eyes met hers as she began to work, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she didn't see a monster. She saw a man who had forgotten he was allowed to be human. Healing, Elena learned, was an act of archaeology. You didn't fix someone all at once. You excavated carefully, layer by layer, until you reached the wound beneath the wound. Adrian's physical scars were just the surface, angry, visible evidence of a deeper trauma that had calcified into his identity. Over the following days, he began to let her in. Not all at once, not willingly, but in small concessions that felt like victories. He allowed her to treat his hand properly. The infection responded to antibiotics, and gradually the inflammation subsided. She worked with quiet efficiency, her touch professional, but not cold. Each time she cleaned the wound, she felt him flinch, not from physical pain, but from the intimacy of being cared for. "You're good at this," he said one afternoon, watching her rewrap his hand with fresh bandages. "I should be. I've been doing it for 12 years. Why did you become a nurse?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in a long time, certainly not recently, when her entire career had become a cautionary tale. "Because I wanted to help people," she said simply. "It sounds naive now." "It doesn't sound naive, it sounds impossible." "Maybe it is." She secured the bandage with medical tape. "But I keep trying anyway." "Even after everything they did to you?" She looked up sharply. "What do you know about that?" Adrian's expression was unreadable. "Mrs. Calloway mentioned you came from St. Catherine's, that there was an incident. I looked it up." Heat flooded Elena's face. Shame, anger, vulnerability all at once. "You investigated me. I needed to know who was in my home. Who was touching me?" He paused. "The article said you were responsible for a patient's death, that you administered the wrong medication." "I didn't." Her voice was tight. "I followed the chart exactly. Someone else made the error, altered the records. By the time anyone noticed, the patient was dead, and I was the easiest person to blame. But you couldn't prove it." "No. So they destroyed you anyway?" "Yes." Adrian was quiet for a moment, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "That's why you're here," he said finally. "You understand what it's like to be named a monster for something you didn't do." "I didn't say I didn't do it. You didn't have to. I can see the truth in how you move, how you care. You're not someone who kills through negligence. You're someone who was murdered by bureaucracy." The accuracy of his observation hit her like a physical thing. She blinked back unexpected tears. "It doesn't matter now," she said, her voice rough. "What's done is done. Does it get easier, being innocent when everyone believes you're guilty?" She met his eyes. In them she saw a mirror of her own pain, the exhaustion of fighting a verdict that had already been decided. "No," she said honestly. "It doesn't get easier. You just get better at carrying it." His expression softened, just barely, but enough that she noticed. "I'm sorry," he said, "for what they did to you. I'm sorry for what they did to you too. You don't even know what happened." "Then tell me." And slowly, haltingly, he began. The pain was worst at night. Adrian had explained that the nerve damage from the burns created a phenomenon called neuropathic pain, sensations that existed without physical cause. Ghost pain, he called it. Fire that kept burning long after the flames were gone. Elena started doing evening checks, arriving at his room around 9 o'clock with pain medication and a presence that, she hoped, felt less clinical than companionate. He was always awake, always sitting in the same chair by the window, staring into darkness. "Tell me about them," she said one night, settling into the chair across from him. "Your wife and son." Adrian's jaw tightened. "Why?" "Because they were real people, not just names in a tragedy. They deserve to be remembered as more than the day they died." He was silent for so long she thought he'd refuse. Then, quietly, he began to speak. "Her name was Isabel. We met in college, art history and business management, completely incompatible on paper. She was brilliant, funny. She collected vintage records and made terrible puns and could quote entire scenes from old movies." His voice took on a warmth she'd never heard before. "She was the best thing that ever happened to me." "And your son?" Tommy. Adrian's voice cracked. "He was 8 years old. He wanted to be a paleontologist, had dinosaur posters all over his room. He'd tell anyone who'd listen about the Cretaceous period and asteroid impacts and mass extinctions." A bitter laugh. "I guess he learned about extinction firsthand." "Adrian, he was supposed to stay with his grandmother that night. That's the part that kills me most. He wasn't supposed to be there, but Isabel let him come home because he missed me, because I'd been traveling for work and he wanted his father." His voice dropped to a whisper. "He died, wanting to see me." Elena felt tears burning behind her eyes. "That's not your fault, isn't it? Everything they loved about me, everything I built, that's what killed them. The business, the success, the enemies I made climbing to the top. If I'd been nobody, if I'd been nothing, they'd still be alive. Or the fire would have happened anyway and killed someone else's family. You can't rewrite fate by imagining different choices. I do it every night." He looked at her finally, his face ravaged by grief that had never healed. Every single night I replay that evening. Different decisions, different routes, different moments where if I'd just... Stop. Elena leaned forward. You'll drive yourself insane. Maybe I already am. She reached out without thinking and placed her hand over his. The scarred one, the damaged one, the one he kept hidden like evidence of crime. He flinched but didn't pull away. Pain hurts less when you touch it, he said quietly. The physical pain or the other kind? Both. They sat like that for a long time, her hand on his breath gradually steadying. Outside, rain began to fall again, and this time, Adrian didn't hear screaming. He heard only the sound of water running home. The truth came in pieces, like a puzzle scattered across too many conversations. Eleanor began to notice contradictions in the narrative, small things that didn't quite align. Adrian spoke of the fire as his responsibility, but his words always circled around it, never landing on specific culpability. When pressed, he'd shut down, disappear back into his shell of self-imposed punishment. She started researching. Late at night in her small room on the 3rd floor, she pulled up archived news articles on her laptop. The headlines were brutal, sensational. Tech mogul's negligence leads to fatal fire. Hale Industries warehouse blaze kills wife child. Adrian Hale, the man who had everything and destroyed it. But as she read deeper, something felt wrong. The articles were heavy on speculation, light on facts. Sources were always anonymous. Details were vague. The investigation had concluded quickly, too quickly perhaps, with findings of systematic safety failures and administrative negligence. Adrian had been CEO of Hale Industries, a technology manufacturing company. The fire had started in one of his warehouses, the same warehouse where inexplicably his wife and son had been that evening. Why were they there? Elena found her answer 3 pages deep in a local newspaper archive. A small article barely noticed, Hale family visiting warehouse for son's school project. Tommy had been doing a presentation on manufacturing. Isabel had arranged a private tour. They were supposed to be there for an hour. The fire had started 40 minutes in. The cause was listed as electrical failure due to improper maintenance. Adrian, as CEO, took responsibility. He stepped down immediately, paid massive settlements, never fought the charges, never defended himself, just disappeared into Ashwood Manor, and became the monster everyone needed him to be. But something nagged at Elena. She expanded her search, looking for information about Hale Industries before the fire. What she found made her blood run cold. 6 months before the tragedy, Adrian had been involved in a bitter corporate dispute. His former business partner, a man named Vincent Moreau, had been forced out of the company after financial irregularities were discovered. Adrian had reported him to authorities. Vincent had threatened lawsuits, revenge, ruin, then silence. Elena found one more article, dated a week after the fire. Former Hale Industries executive found dead, apparent suicide. Vincent Moreau had been found in his apartment with a note confessing to mistakes and failures. The article mentioned he'd been despondent after losing his career. Nothing about the fire, nothing connecting him to the tragedy. But Elena felt it in her gut, the truth hiding between the lines. She brought her laptop to Adrian's room the next evening. "Tell me about Vincent Moreau," she said without preamble. Adrian, who'd been reading in his chair, went absolutely still. The book in his hand trembled. "How do you know that name?" "I've been researching the fire, your company, everything." She sat across from him. "Vincent Moreau was your business partner. You had him removed for embezzlement. He threatened you, and then 6 months later, your family died in a fire, and a week after that he killed himself." "Stop, Adrian, I said stop." He slammed the book down, his scarred face contorted with anguish. "You don't know what you're talking about. Then tell me, because everything I read says you took the blame for something that might not have been your fault at all. Was it him? Did Vincent start the fire?" The silence that followed was suffocating. When Adrian finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "They never proved it. The investigators found evidence of electrical failure, old wiring, improper maintenance that happened under my watch. Whether Vincent deliberately caused it, or whether it was just neglect that he exploited," he shook his head. "In the end, what's the difference? The difference is guilt. I am guilty." The words exploded from him. "I knew Vincent was dangerous. I knew he blamed me for destroying his life. And I brought my family into that warehouse anyway. I was the CEO. It was my responsibility to ensure safety. My arrogance, My belief that I was untouchable. That's what killed them. That's not the same as setting a fire. No, it's worse. Adrian stood, pacing like a caged animal. Because if Vincent started that fire, he did it to hurt me. Which means they died as collateral damage in a war I started. They died because someone hated me enough to commit murder. How is that better? Because it means you were a victim, not a perpetrator. I was a father and husband who failed to protect his family. His voice cracked. Do you know what Isabel's last words to me were? On the phone, while the fire was spreading before they... He couldn't finish. Elena felt tears streaming down her face. What did she say? She said, "Tell Tommy I love him. Not save us. Not help." She knew. She knew they weren't getting out. And she used her last breath to tell our son she loved him. And I wasn't there to say it back. He sank to his knees, a broken man crushed under the weight of survival. Elena knelt beside him. It wasn't your fault. It was. It wasn't. Then why am I the one who lived? She had no answer to that. No one did. So she did the only thing she could. She put her arms around him and held him while he shattered. Later, after he'd exhausted himself, after the storm had passed, she helped him back to his chair. His breathing was ragged, his face wet. "Vincent left something," he said quietly, "before he died. A letter. It was delivered to me after his funeral. What did it say? That he was sorry. That he never meant for them to die. That the fire was supposed to be small, just enough to cost me money, reputation, not lives." Adrian's laugh was bitter. He said he hoped I could forgive him someday. Then he killed himself before I could answer. Do you forgive him? No. The word was absolute. But I can't hate him either, because every time I think about what he did, I remember what I did. Pushed a desperate man into madness. It's a circle with no end. Elena reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I found something else. She handed it to him. It was a photograph, a copy of one from the news archives. Isabel and Tommy smiling at a school event, alive, happy, beautiful. Adrian stared at it, his hands trembling. They didn't die hating you, Eleanor said softly. They died loving you. Maybe it's time you remembered that. The confession changed everything, and nothing. Adrian didn't miraculously heal. He didn't suddenly forgive himself. But something had shifted. A door opened just enough to let light into a room that had been dark for 5 years. He began to talk more, not always about the fire, but about them. Isabel's love of thunderstorms, Tommy's terrible knock-knock jokes, the life they'd built together before it all burned. Eleanor listened. She didn't try to fix him or minimize his pain. She just bore witness to his grief, and somehow that was enough. But she couldn't let go of Vincent Moreau. The suicide note. The timing. The convenient confession that absolved everyone except the dead. It felt too neat, too final, like a story that had been carefully packaged to prevent further questions. One evening, she cornered Mrs. Calloway in the kitchen. "Tell me about Vincent Moreau," she said. The housekeeper's expression hardened. "That's not your concern. Adrian's mental health is my concern, and I think the truth about that fire is part of his healing." The truth. Mrs. Calloway's laugh was bitter. The truth is buried with 2 bodies and scattered in Vincent's ashes. What good does digging it up do now? Maybe none. Or maybe it's the difference between Adrian living or dying in this house. Something in Mrs. Calloway's face crumbled, just for a moment, but Elena saw it. "You care about him," Elena said quietly. "You've watched him destroy himself for 5 years. Help me help him." The old woman was silent for a long moment. Then she sighed, deep and tired. Vincent Moreau was not a good man, but he wasn't a murderer either, not intentionally. She sat heavily at the kitchen table. "I was here the day his letter arrived. I saw Mr. Hale read it. I've never seen a man look so broken, not even the day of the funeral. What did the letter say? He told me Vincent apologized, but there was more." Mrs. Calloway's voice dropped. Vincent explained everything, how he'd planned to sabotage the warehouse, cut corners on the electrical work, file false safety reports. He wanted Adrian to lose money and face lawsuits. He wanted him to suffer financially, but he didn't know Isabel and Tommy would be there. No one knew. It was a last-minute decision. Isabel called Adrian that afternoon to tell him they'd be stopping by. He was in London for meetings. He couldn't get back in time. Elena felt cold. So, when the fire started, Vincent was already gone. He'd set the stage weeks earlier. The faulty wiring was his doing. But by the time it ignited, he was 3 states away, probably thinking he'd just cost Adrian some property damage and insurance headaches. And then he found out people died. 2 people. A woman and child. It destroyed him. Mrs. Calloway's eyes were wet. He confessed everything in that letter. Not to the police, to Adrian. Said he couldn't live with what he'd done. Said he hoped Adrian would find some way to forgive him, because God certainly wouldn't. Why didn't Adrian go to the police? Why didn't he expose the truth? Because of Isabel's mother. The answer came from behind them. Adrian stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. "How long have you been standing there?" Elena asked. "Long enough." He moved into the kitchen slowly, painfully. "You want to know why I never told the truth? Because Isabel's mother, Margaret, had already lost everything. Her daughter, her grandson. If she'd known it was murder, if she'd known they died because of my corporate wars, it would have destroyed her. So you let everyone think you were responsible." "I was responsible, just not in the way they thought." He sat across from Mrs. Calloway. "Margaret needed someone to blame. I gave her that. The company, my negligence, my arrogance, those were real enough, and Vincent's confession. It didn't change the fact that my choices led to their deaths." "That's not justice," Elena said. "No, it's mercy." Adrian's voice was firm. "Margaret got to bury her family believing it was a tragic accident, made worse by corporate negligence. She didn't have to know her daughter was murdered as revenge. She didn't have to carry the weight of knowing someone hated me enough to kill. I took that burden. I became the monster so she could have someone to hate who was still alive to receive it." Elena stared at him, understanding washing over her like cold water. "You sacrificed yourself." "I sacrificed nothing. They were already gone. My reputation, my life. What did any of it matter after that?" "It matters because you're still here." Elena's voice rose. "You're still alive, Adrian, and you've spent 5 years in this tomb punishing yourself for having the audacity to survive. What else should I do?" His eyes were blazing now. "Move on? Find happiness? Pretend I deserve a future when they don't have one? I think you should tell the truth. I think Margaret deserves to know." "No." The word was absolute. "You will not tell her. You will not dig this up. Vincent is dead. The company is dissolved. The only person left who could be hurt by the truth is an old woman who's already lost everything. I won't destroy what little peace she has, even if it means destroying yourself. Especially then." The 3 of them sat in heavy silence. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the old windows. Finally, Mrs. Calloway spoke. "There's something else you should know, Miss Mirren. Something Mr. Hale won't tell you himself." "Mrs. Calloway," Adrian warned. "No, she deserves to understand." The housekeeper looked at Elena. When Mr. Hale read Vincent's letter, he didn't just learn the truth about the fire. Vincent included something else. A confession about other things. Falsified records at the company. Financial crimes. Schemes that Vincent had covered up by pointing blame elsewhere. Elena's breath caught. Like medication records at a hospital. Adrian's face went pale. Mrs. Calloway nodded slowly. Vincent had connections throughout the city. Business contacts, corrupt administrators. One of them worked at St. Catherine's Hospital. In his letter, Vincent mentioned an incident. A nurse who was framed for a mistake she didn't make. He said it was one of many times he'd used his connections to ruin innocent people when it served his purposes. The room spun. Elena gripped the edge of the table. "You knew," she whispered, looking at Adrian. "You knew what happened to me." "Not at first. Not when I hired you." His voice was rough. "But I looked into your background, and when I read the details, I recognized Vincent's signature, the same tactics he used on others. I couldn't prove it, but I knew." "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because what good would it do? Vincent is dead. The administrator he bribed is likely gone or covered his tracks, and your reputation was already destroyed. Telling you the truth would only add rage to your grief without giving you recourse." Elena felt tears streaming down her face. Not sadness, but something more complex. A mixture of vindication and fury and overwhelming exhaustion. "So you hired me," she said slowly. "You brought me here to care for the man who indirectly ruined my life." "No." Adrian leaned forward, his scarred face earnest. "I hired you because we were the same. 2 innocent people branded as guilty. 2 souls living in exile from a world that demanded our punishment. I thought," he faltered, "I thought maybe if I could help you find some peace here, some purpose, it might be the only good thing I could do with what's left of my life. That's not your choice to make for me. I know, and I'm sorry. But Eleanor, you were drowning just like I was. I saw it in your eyes the first day you walked in here. You were looking for a reason to keep going, and I was looking for a way to make my existence mean something before I—" He stopped. "Before you what?" Adrian was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "Before I finish what Vincent started." The words hung in the air like smoke. Eleanor understood. The isolation, the self-destruction, the refusal of treatment. He wasn't just punishing himself, he was slowly, methodically dying, giving himself the death sentence he believed he deserved. "No," she said firmly. "No, you don't get to do that. It's not your decision." "The hell it isn't. You brought me here. You made me care. You don't get to make me complicit in your suicide." "I'm not asking you to be complicit. I'm asking you to let me choose how my story ends. By making sure it ends in tragedy. By proving everyone right who called you a monster." Elena stood, her chair scraping against the floor. "That's cowardice, Adrian, not penance." His eyes flashed with anger. "You have no idea what you're talking about." "I have every idea. Because 6 months ago I stood on a bridge and thought about jumping. I thought about how easy it would be to just stop fighting, stop explaining, stop carrying the weight of everyone else's judgment. And you know what stopped me?" "What?" "Spite," she laughed bitterly. "Spite and stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to let the people who destroyed me have the satisfaction of finishing the job. I'm still here, not because I found peace or forgiveness or justice. I'm here because I'm too damn angry to die quietly." Adrian stared at her, something shifting in his expression. "So no," Elena continued, her voice shaking. "I will not let you slowly kill yourself in this house. I will not watch you waste away out of some misguided sense of noble suffering. If you want to die, you're going to have to live first. Really live. Face the pain, face the truth, face Margaret and tell her what really happened. And then if you still want to disappear, at least you'll have earned the right to make that choice. You can't force me to live," Adrian said quietly. "No, but I can refuse to make dying easy." She grabbed her medical bag. "I'm going to see Margaret tomorrow. I'm going to tell her everything." "Elena, please." "Unless you come with me." The ultimatum fell between them like a gauntlet. Adrian looked at Mrs. Calloway, who remained silent, her weathered face unreadable. Then he looked back at Elena, this fierce, damaged woman who'd somehow become his mirror and his conscience. "If I go," he said slowly, "if I tell her, she'll hate me even more. The truth is worse than what she already believes. Maybe. Or maybe she deserves to hate the right person for the right reasons. And if it destroys her, then we'll be there to help her survive it. Because that's what we do, Adrian. We survive." He closed his eyes, and in that moment, Eleanor saw the full weight of his exhaustion. 5 years of carrying a lie. 5 years of being a monster so others could be victims. "I don't know if I can," he whispered. "You don't have to know. You just have to try." They didn't go the next day, or the day after that. The conversation had cracked something open in Adrian, not healing, but a painful awareness that perhaps survival was still a choice he could make. He spent the following week in a kind of limbo, hovering between the man he'd been and someone he might become. Eleanor watched him carefully. She saw the moments when he'd stand at the window longer than usual, as if considering the world beyond the glass. She saw him pick up his phone twice, Margaret's number on the screen before setting it down again. She didn't push. Pushing, she'd learned, only made people retreat further into their fortifications. Instead, she focused on the small victories, getting him to eat regularly, treating his scars properly, convincing him to walk in the garden just for 10 minutes a day. The garden had been Isabel's, Mrs. Calloway explained. She'd loved roses, had planted them everywhere. They'd grown wild now, untended, but they still bloomed stubbornly each season. Adrian walked among them like a ghost, revisiting his own grave. "She talked to them," he said one afternoon, pausing by a particularly large bush heavy with red blooms. "Isabel. She'd come out here and have full conversations with the roses, named them, told them about her day." He touched a petal with his scarred hand. "I used to think it was silly. Now I understand. She was teaching them how to grow in difficult soil." Eleanor stood beside him, saying nothing. "I've been thinking about what you said," Adrian continued, "about living before dying, about earning the right to choose how my story ends. And I don't know if I can face Margaret, but maybe I can face myself first." He pulled something from his pocket, a small leather journal, worn and weathered. "I've been writing," he said, "every night since our conversation. Everything I remember, everything I felt, everything I should have said to Isabel and Tommy, but never got the chance." He handed her the journal. Eleanor opened it carefully. The handwriting was cramped, sometimes shaky, But the words were beautiful, devastating, raw. Dear Isabel, I don't know if the dead can read letters from the living, but I'm writing anyway, because the silence is killing me slower than the fire killed you. They say time heals, but whoever said that never loved someone the way I loved you. Time doesn't heal. It just teaches you how to carry the weight without collapsing every hour instead of every minute. Eleanor felt tears blur the words. There are pages for Tommy too, Adrian said quietly. Things I wanted to teach him. Things I wanted to say. I thought maybe if I could find the words, I could find the will to say them out loud. To Margaret, to anyone who needs to hear them. This is beautiful, Adrian. It's honest. That's different from beautiful. Sometimes they're the same thing. He took the journal back, holding it like a sacred object. There's something else I need to do. Before I can face Margaret, before I can tell the truth. What? I need to visit them. Isabel and Tommy. Their graves. His voice cracked. I haven't been there since the funeral. I couldn't. But if I'm going to ask for any kind of absolution, I need to start by asking them first. Elena nodded. When do you want to go? Now, before I lose my nerve. The cemetery was on the edge of town, small and quiet, overlooking a valley that caught the afternoon light like gold. Adrian directed her through the gates with a voice that grew thinner with each turn. They were buried together under a large oak tree. The headstone was simple, elegant. Isabel Marie Hale, beloved wife, mother, light, 1985-2020. Thomas Adrian Hale, our beautiful boy, 2012-2020. Together in love, forever in memory. Adrian approached slowly, as if the ground itself might reject him. When he reached the grave, he sank to his knees, his damaged hand pressed against the cold stone. Elena stayed back, giving him space. She watched as his shoulders began to shake, watched as 5 years of grief finally found release. He didn't make a sound, just knelt there, touching the names carved in marble, his body racked with silent sobs. After what felt like hours, he began to speak. I'm sorry. His voice was hoarse, broken. God, I'm so sorry. I know I've said it 1,000 times in my head, but I never said it here. I never said it where it matters. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm sorry I built a life that made us targets. I'm sorry I survived when you didn't. The wind moved through the oak tree, rustling leaves like whispered responses. Tommy, buddy, Adrian's voice broke completely. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry you were scared. I'm sorry your last minutes were filled with fire and fear instead of all the love you deserved. You were the best thing I ever made, and I failed you. I failed you both. He pressed his forehead against the stone. I don't know how to live without you. I don't know how to be someone other than the man who destroyed everything he loved. But there's this woman, Eleanor, and she's making me remember that I used to be human, that maybe, somehow, I still could be. I don't know if you'd want that for me. I don't know if I deserve it, but I'm trying. God help me, I'm trying. Elena couldn't hold back anymore. She walked forward and knelt beside him, placing her hand on his shoulder. They'd want you to try, she said softly. Any parent, any spouse who loved you, they'd want you to survive them. How can you know that? Because love doesn't die with the body. It stays. And it always wants the people left behind to find reasons to keep going. Adrian looked at her, his face wet with tears. I don't know how. We'll figure it out together. He nodded slowly, then turned back to the grave. From his pocket, he pulled out a rose, one of the red ones from Isabel's garden. She always loved these, he said, placing it gently against the headstone. I'm going to start taking care of her garden again, and I'm going to tell your grandmother the truth, Tommy, all of it. So she knows you didn't die because of some random tragedy. So she knows there was someone to blame, and it wasn't just fate or God or bad luck. He stood, Eleanor rising with him. And then? She asked. Then I don't know. I guess I'll see if there's anything left of me worth saving. There is, Eleanor said with certainty. I've seen it. They walked back to the car in silence, but it was a different kind of silence than before. Not the heavy, suffocating silence of a man waiting to die, but the quiet, tentative silence of someone considering, for the first time in years, what it might mean to live. That evening, Adrian did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He left his room and came downstairs. Elena found him in the library, surrounded by books and papers, writing by lamplight. He looked up when she entered, and there was something different in his eyes. Not happiness, not peace, but possibility. I'm writing the letter, he said, to Margaret. Everything. The truth about Vincent, about the fire, about why I never said anything. I want to read it to her in person, but I need to have the words ready. I need to know exactly what I'm going to say. Elena sat across from him. Can I help? You already have. He set down his pen. More than you know. You came into this house and refused to let me be a monster. You saw something in me I'd forgotten was there, and you were brave enough to call me on my bullshit when I needed it most. I just told you the truth, which is the bravest thing anyone's done for me in 5 years. He paused. There's something I need to tell you too, about why I really hired you. You mean besides the Vincent connection? Yes. He took a breath. When I read about what happened to you at St. Catherine's, I recognized something beyond Vincent's tactics. I recognized the look in your eyes in the photo they printed. The same look I saw in the mirror every day, like you'd been hollowed out and were just going through the motions of being alive. That's about right, Elena said quietly. I hired you because I thought if I could help you find purpose again, even in this dark place, it might be the closest thing to redemption I could achieve. I thought if I couldn't save myself, maybe I could save someone else who'd been destroyed by the same man. That's a lot of pressure to put on a job application. He smiled, a real smile, small but genuine. I know, and I'm sorry for that too. You deserve to know the full truth. You deserved the choice. I'm making my choice now, Elena said. I'm choosing to stay. Not because I pity you or because I think I can fix you, but because somehow taking care of you has helped me remember how to take care of myself. Misery loves company. No, survival recognizes survival. They sat together as the evening deepened. Two people who'd been called monsters learning slowly, painfully how to be human again. Outside, the first stars appeared, and for the first time in 5 years, Adrian looked up and saw them not as distant, unreachable light, but as proof that even in darkness something still shines. Margaret Hale lived in a modest house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by a garden that had clearly once been magnificent, but now showed signs of neglect. Elena noticed the details as they approached. Overgrown flower beds, a sagging gate, paint peeling from the window frames, the house of someone who'd stopped caring about maintenance, because what was the point of preserving anything when everything that mattered was already gone? Adrian sat frozen in the passenger seat of Elena's car, staring at the front door. She doesn't know we're coming, he said for the 3rd time. No. If we'd called ahead, she'd have refused to see you. Elena turned off the engine. Sometimes you have to ask for forgiveness in person, because it's harder to slam a door in someone's face than to hang up a phone. She might slam the door anyway, then we'll knock again. Adrian clutched the letter he'd written, 5 pages of careful, agonized truth. His hands were shaking. I can't do this, he whispered. Yes, you can. What if she hates me more after? What if the truth destroys what little peace she has? Elena turned to face him. Adrian, you've spent 5 years protecting her from the truth at the cost of your own life. Maybe it's time to give her the respect of deciding for herself what she can handle. She's not fragile. She's survived losing her daughter and grandson. She's stronger than you think. Or she's barely holding on, just like I was. Then we'll be there to catch her. Elena opened her door. Come on, we do this together. They walked up the path slowly. Each step felt like moving through water. When they reached the door, Adrian raised his hand to knock, then froze. Elena knocked for him. Footsteps inside. Slow, shuffling. The door opened a crack, and a woman's face appeared. Late 60s, with Isabel's eyes and lines carved deep by grief. Yes, Mrs. Hale, Elena said gently. My name is Elena Mirren. I'm a nurse. I've been caring for your son-in-law. The woman's expression hardened immediately. I have no son-in-law. Margaret, please. Adrian's voice was barely audible. I need to talk to you. Margaret's eyes found him, and the hatred that flashed across her face was visceral. How dare you come here? I know I have no right, but there's something you need to know about the fire, about what really happened. I know what happened. You killed my family through negligence and cowardice. No. Adrian's voice strengthened. It was murder, Margaret. Vincent Moreau murdered them, and I covered it up to protect you from the truth. The door which had been closing stopped. What did you say? Please, can we come in? I have a letter. Everything is explained. You deserve to know what really happened that night. Margaret stared at him for a long moment. Eleanor could see the war happening behind her eyes, the desire to slam the door versus the desperate need to understand. Finally, she opened it wider. 5 minutes. They sat in a living room frozen in time. Photos of Isabel and Tommy covered every surface. The furniture was the same as it had been when they were alive. Even the calendar on the wall was still turned to November 2020, the month they died. Margaret sat across from them, her posture rigid, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. "Talk," she said. Adrian handed her the letter. "Everything is in here, but I need to say some of it out loud. I need you to hear it from me." He took a shaking breath and began. He told her about Vincent, about the embezzlement, the termination, the threats, about the investigation that proved Vincent had systematically sabotaged the warehouse's electrical system weeks before the fire, about the confession letter that arrived after Vincent's suicide, revealing it had been revenge gone horrifically wrong. He told her why he'd kept silent, to spare her the knowledge that her family had been murdered, to give her someone to blame who was still alive to receive her hatred, to make himself the monster, so she didn't have to imagine her daughter's last moments as a targeted killing. Margaret listened without interruption, her face becoming paler with each revelation. When Adrian finished, silence filled the room like floodwater. "Show me the letter," she finally said. "Vincent's confession. I don't have it anymore. I burned it years ago. I couldn't bear to—" "Of course you don't have it." Margaret's voice was cold. "How convenient. You come here 5 years later with a story that paints you as a noble martyr instead of a negligent executive, and there's no proof." "Mrs. Hale, I can verify some of it," Eleanor interjected. "Vincent's connection to other incidents, his methods. And who are you exactly? His nurse, his accomplice? Another person he's paid to support his delusions?" "I'm someone who knows what it's like to be blamed for something I didn't do," Elena said quietly. "Vincent destroyed my career too. I have no reason to lie for Adrian." Margaret looked at the letter in her lap unopened. "Why now? Why come here after 5 years of silence?" "Because I'm dying," Adrian said simply. "Not today, not tomorrow, but slowly. I've been dying since the fire, and I realized I don't want to die with this lie between us. You deserve to hate me for real reasons, not false ones, and I deserve to finally tell the truth, even if it costs me everything. You already lost everything. The day they died." "No," Adrian's voice cracked. "I lost them, but I still had my pride, my martyrdom, my belief that suffering in silence made me noble. That was what I'm losing now. That's what Elena is taking from me, the comfort of being a monster. Because being a monster is easier than being a man who failed to protect his family and has to live with it." Margaret's fingers trembled on the letter. "If what you're saying is true, if Vincent really—" "Then you've spent 5 years hating the wrong person," Adrian finished. "And I let you because I thought it was easier. I was wrong. Forgive me or don't, Margaret, but please, read the letter. Know the truth. Decide for yourself what it means." Margaret stood abruptly. "I think you should leave." "Margaret, leave." Her voice broke. I can't process this right now. I can't look at you and hear these words and know if they're true or just another lie to ease your conscience before you die. Get out, please." Adrian stood slowly, defeat written in every line of his body. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for all of it." Eleanor guided him toward the door. As they stepped outside, Margaret called out, "Mr. Hale." He turned. She held up the letter. "I'll read it. I won't promise to believe it, but I'll read it." It was the smallest mercy, but it was something. As they drove away, Elena glanced at Adrian. He was crying silently, his scarred face wet with tears. "She'll come around," Elena said. "She just needs time." "What if she doesn't?" "Then you'll have done what you needed to do anyway. You told the truth. You gave her the choice. The rest is up to her." Adrian nodded, staring out the window at the passing landscape. "Do you think Vincent is burning in hell right now?" "I don't know. Do you think you are?" He considered this. "I think hell is a choice we make. Vincent chose it when he set that fire. I chose it when I locked myself in that house. Maybe Margaret is choosing it now by holding on to hatred. Or maybe," Eleanor said softly, "maybe we all get to choose to leave it too." 3 weeks passed with no word from Margaret. Adrian didn't mention it, but Elena saw the way he checked the mail each day with barely concealed hope, saw the disappointment that settled over him each evening when nothing came. He was changing, though. Slowly, like ice melting in early spring. He'd started taking longer walks in the garden, started eating meals in the dining room instead of his room, started talking about what came next, even if he didn't know what that meant yet. They'd fallen into a routine that felt less like patient and caregiver and more like two people learning to exist in the same broken world. They'd have coffee in the mornings while Elena changed his bandages. They'd walk the grounds in the afternoons, discussing everything and nothing. In the evenings, he'd read her passages from the journal he was still writing, letters to Isabel and Tommy that helped him process grief he'd kept locked away for so long. "Listen to this," he said one night, his voice tentative. I wrote it this morning. Tommy, I've been thinking about the dinosaurs you loved so much, how they ruled the world for millions of years and then disappeared in fire and darkness. You used to say it was sad but also kind of beautiful, that even the mightiest things eventually make room for something new. I think maybe you were trying to teach me something I was too stupid to understand, that endings are just transformations, that even when something is destroyed, what comes after can be good too. I'm trying to believe that, buddy. I'm trying to think that maybe who I was died in that fire with you, and who I could become is still waiting to be discovered. Would you be proud of me for trying? I hope so. I hope wherever you are, you can see that I'm finally learning the lessons you tried to teach me about loss and change and letting go. He looked up, his eyes wet. Is that stupid? Writing letters to a dead child about dinosaur metaphors. It's beautiful, Elena said honestly. It's you finally letting yourself grieve instead of just punishing yourself. It feels disloyal somehow. Like if I move forward, I'm leaving them behind. You're not leaving them behind. You're bringing them with you. There's a difference. Before Adrian could respond, the doorbell rang. They looked at each other in surprise. No one visited Ashwood Manor. No one except delivery drivers who left packages at the gate and fled. Mrs. Calloway answered the door, and moments later appeared in the library doorway, her face unreadable. Mr. Hale, you have a visitor. Margaret stood behind her, clutching a worn leather purse and looking like she'd aged another decade in 3 weeks. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face drawn. Adrian stood so quickly, his chair tipped backward. Margaret, I read your letter, she said without preamble. All of it, multiple times. And then I did my own research. Talked to investigators who worked the case, found the corruption trail Vincent left, spoke to others he'd destroyed. Her voice shook. It's all true, isn't it? Every word. Yes. She swayed slightly, and Eleanor rushed to offer her a seat. Margaret sank into it like all her strings had been cut. 5 years, she whispered. 5 years I've hated you, blamed you, wished you died instead of them. And you, she looked up at him, her face a mask of anguish. You let me. You stood there and took every ounce of my rage, and never defended yourself. Why? Because you needed someone to blame, and I needed to be punished. It served us both. It destroyed you. I was already destroyed. No. Margaret's voice strengthened. No, you were grieving. There's a difference. I was grieving too, but I turned mine into hatred because hatred is easier than pain. And you gave me a target for it. You let me pour 5 years of poison into you and never said a word. Tears streamed down her face now. That's not martyrdom, Adrian. That's suicide. Just slow instead of fast. I know that now. Because of her. Margaret looked at Elena. Because some stranger cared enough to refuse to let you die quietly. Yes, Adrian said simply. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a small photo album. Weathered and obviously well-loved. After Isabel died, I couldn't look at pictures. It hurt too much. So I put them all away in boxes and tried to forget what happiness looked like. She opened the album carefully. But after reading your letter, I got them out again. And I saw things I'd forgotten. She turned the album toward Adrian. The first page showed Isabel and Adrian on their wedding day, radiant, young, impossibly in love. Look at how she's looking at you, Margaret said softly. That's not the face of a woman married to a monster. That's pure joy. She flipped pages. Isabel pregnant, Adrian's hand on her swollen belly. Tommy as a newborn, cradled in his father's arms. Birthday parties, holidays, ordinary moments made extraordinary by love. My daughter loved you completely, Margaret said, and my grandson worshipped you. I'd forgotten that in my grief. I'd rewritten history to make you a villain so I didn't have to face the randomness of their deaths. Because if you were evil, if you were negligent, then their deaths meant something. They were punishment for your sins. But if Vincent murdered them as collateral damage in a feud, then it was meaningless, Adrian finished, random, pointless. Yes, Margaret closed the album. And that's so much harder to accept. That the 2 people I loved most died for no reason except one man's jealousy and rage. That's unbearable. I know, but it's the truth. And you tried to shield me from it. She stood, walked to where Adrian stood frozen, and did something he clearly never expected. She embraced him. Adrian broke. 5 years of holding everything in, of being strong enough to be hated, of carrying guilt and grief and loneliness, it all shattered. He sobbed into Margaret's shoulder like a child, and she held him, crying too. 2 people united finally, not by rage but by shared immeasurable loss. I'm sorry, Adrian gasped. I'm so sorry I couldn't save them. I know you are. And I'm sorry I made you carry my hatred on top of your grief. I'm sorry I needed a monster when what we both needed was to mourn together. Elena watched from across the room, tears streaming down her own face. This was what healing looked like. Not pretty, not easy, but real. Two people who'd been enemies learning to be allies in survival. When they finally separated, Margaret cupped Adrian's scarred face in her hands. Isabel would be furious with both of us, she said with a watery smile. Furious at you for giving up on life, and furious at me for helping you do it. She always said we were both too stubborn for our own good. She was right about everything, Adrian said. She was. Margaret turned to Elena. Thank you for not letting him die. Thank you for seeing what I couldn't. I just refused to accept the version of him everyone else believed, Eleanor said. That's exactly what he needed. Margaret looked back at Adrian. I can't say I forgive you completely. I don't know if I ever can, but I can say I understand now. And I can say that Isabel and Tommy loved you and they wouldn't want you to keep destroying yourself in their memory. I don't know how to stop. Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together. She pulled an envelope from her purse. I wrote you a letter too, read it when you're ready. It explains, well, everything I couldn't say here. She handed it to him, then gathered her things. Mrs. Calloway mentioned Isabel's rose garden has come back to life, she said at the door. Would it be all right if I visited sometime? To see it? Anytime, Adrian said. You're always welcome here, Margaret. Always. After she left, Adrian held the envelope like it might dissolve in his hands. Elena started to give him privacy, but he called her back. Stay, he said. Please, I don't want to read this alone. She sat beside him as he opened it. The letter was shorter than his had been, written in elegant script. Adrian, I spent 5 years hating you. Now I spend every moment hating myself for wasting that hatred. Vincent took my daughter and grandson, but I let him take you too by refusing to see the truth. Elena told me something when we spoke on the phone this week. She said you've been writing letters to Isabel and Tommy. She said you're learning to grieve instead of just suffer. I want you to know that I'm doing the same. I'm reading their favorite books again, playing Isabel's records, looking at photos without crying every time. And I'm thinking about what they'd want for us, for both of us who loved them so completely. They'd want us to live, Adrian. Not just exist, but truly live. To find joy again, even if it feels like betrayal. To honor their memory by refusing to become ghosts ourselves. I don't know if we can be family again. Too much has broken between us. But maybe we can be something else. Two people who understand that survival isn't weakness, and that forgiveness isn't forgetting. Come visit their graves with me sometime. Let's tell them together that we're trying, that we're choosing life even when it hurts. With more understanding than I thought possible, Margaret. Adrian folded the letter carefully, his hands steady for the first time since they'd left Margaret's house. She called me by my name, he said softly. Not you or him or that man. Adrian, like I'm human again. You always were, Elena said. You just forgot. He looked at her, and in his eyes she saw something she'd never seen before. Not hope exactly, but its precursor. The willingness to believe hope might be possible. I think I'm ready, he said. Ready for what? To stop being a monster. To try being a man again. 2 months later, spring arrived at Ashwood Manor. The change was subtle at first. Crocuses pushing through the last of winter's snow, birdsong returning to the gardens, light lingering longer each evening. But it felt profound, as if the house itself was waking from a long hibernation. Adrian had transformed too. He'd gained weight, his face filling out from the gaunt hollows of despair. The scars would always be there, but they looked different now. Not marks of shame, but evidence of survival. He moved through the house with purpose, rather than haunting it like a ghost. He'd started physical therapy in earnest, working to restore mobility to his damaged hand. He'd reopened parts of the manor that had been closed for years, the library, the music room, even Isabel's studio where she'd painted. He didn't erase her presence. Instead, he honored it by living around it rather than hiding from it. He and Margaret had visited the cemetery together 3 times. The first visit had been silent, both of them simply sitting by the graves, present with their grief. The second, they'd talked about Isabel and Tommy, sharing memories, laughing and crying in equal measure. The third, Margaret had brought Tommy's favorite book, and Adrian had read it aloud, his voice breaking only twice. Elena watched these transformations with quiet satisfaction. She'd done her job, not just as a nurse, but as a witness to someone's return to humanity. But she knew her time at Ashwood was ending. Adrian didn't need a full-time caregiver anymore. He needed a friend, a confidant, maybe eventually a therapist, but not a nurse who reminded him daily of the invalid he'd chosen to become. She'd started looking at job postings again. Nothing felt right. Every hospital, every care facility reminded her of St. Catherine's, of the accusations that had destroyed her career. She'd saved Adrian from his tomb, but she was still living in hers. It was a Tuesday evening when Adrian knocked on her door. "I want to show you something," he said. "In my room. It's important." Eleanor followed him, curious. When they entered, she saw the desk covered in papers as usual, but something was different. He'd organized them into a leather-bound book. Professional, beautiful, complete. "I finished it," he said, picking up the book reverently. "The journal. Every letter I wanted to write to Isabel and Tommy. Everything I needed to say to make peace with their deaths and my survival." "Adrian, that's wonderful. There's more." He opened to the last section. "I wrote something about you too, about what you did for me. I wanted you to read it before I give this to you." He handed her the book, opened to a page near the end. The header read, "To Elena, the woman who refused to let me disappear." Elena began to read. "There's a woman named Elena Mirren who came into my life when I'd already decided it was over. She arrived like an uninvited conscience, refusing to accept the story I'd spent 5 years perfecting, that I was a monster who deserved isolation and slow death. I fought her at first, pushed her away, did everything I could to prove I was beyond saving, but she had this infuriating quality. She saw through the performance. She saw the man underneath the guilt, the human beneath the horror story. What I didn't know, what she never told me until I'd already hired her, was that she'd been destroyed by the same man who destroyed my family. Vincent Moreau's corruption had reached far beyond me, and Elena had been one of his casualties. Her career, her reputation, her sense of self, all sacrificed to cover someone else's mistakes. When I learned the truth, I was terrified she'd leave, that she'd see me as connected to her trauma, complicit in her ruin. Instead, she stayed, because Elena understood something I'd forgotten, that we're all connected by suffering, but we don't have to be defined by it. She taught me that healing isn't about forgetting or forgiving or even understanding. It's about choosing to live despite the pain. It's about refusing to let tragedy have the final word. I know she thinks she failed at St. Catherine's, that the patient who died represents her greatest failure, but she's wrong. Her greatest success is sitting here, writing this, alive and trying, instead of dead and proven right about my own worthlessness. She saved my life by refusing to let me die with dignity, and I want to save hers too. That's why I'm giving her this journal, not as a gift, but as evidence. Evidence that people can be remade, that reputations can be rebuilt, that anyone brave enough to walk into a monster's house and call him human deserves the same courtesy. There's more I need to tell her, more I need to give her, but it starts with this simple truth. Elena Mirren is the bravest person I've ever met, and the world deserves to know it." Elena looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Adrian, there's something else." He pulled out another envelope, this one sealed with a wax stamp. "I've spent the last month working with lawyers and investigators. I had them look into what happened at St. Catherine's. Really look, with resources and access you never had." Her heart stopped. "What did you find?" "Everything." His voice was firm, certain. "The administrator Vincent bribed, the falsified records, the real person responsible for the medication error. All of it documented, verified, ready to be presented to the medical board." Elena's legs gave out. She sank into the chair, the envelope shaking in her hands. "You can clear your name," Adrian said gently. "The evidence is overwhelming. You'll get your career back, your reputation, everything they took from you." "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you do this?" "Because you did it for me first. Because you refused to let me be a monster. So I refuse to let you be a scapegoat. Because we both deserve better than the lies that were told about us." Elena opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was a comprehensive report. Witness statements, financial records, email trails, everything proving her innocence beyond any doubt. Attached was a letter from the medical board acknowledging the error and requesting a meeting to discuss reinstatement. "I didn't ask you first," Adrian said quietly. "I probably should have, but I was afraid you'd tell me not to, that you'd say it didn't matter anymore, or that you'd moved on. So I just did it. Forgive me if that was wrong." "Wrong?" Elena laughed through her tears. Adrian, I don't have words. I thought I'd lost everything forever. Nothing is forever. Not death, not guilt, not even reputation. We get to rewrite our stories, Elena. Both of us. She stood and embraced him fiercely. Thank you for seeing me when no one else would. Thank you for seeing me first. They stood like that for a long moment. Two people who'd been called monsters learning to call each other human. When they separated, Adrian smiled. A real, genuine smile that transformed his scarred face into something approaching peace. There's one more thing in the report, he said. At the very end, open to the last page. Elena flipped through the documents until she reached the final sheet. It was a letter written in Adrian's handwriting. To whom it may concern, I am writing to offer Miss Elena Mirren a position as Director of Patient Care at the Catherine Hale Memorial Clinic, a new medical facility I am founding in memory of my late wife and son. The clinic will serve underserved populations who cannot afford traditional care. It will be staffed by medical professionals who believe in second chances, both for patients and practitioners. Miss Mirren has proven herself to be exactly the kind of caregiver we need. Compassionate, skilled, and willing to see humanity in the most difficult circumstances. Her experience has given her insight that cannot be taught, only earned through suffering and survival. If she accepts, she will have full autonomy over hiring, protocols, and treatment philosophy. The clinic exists to honor the memory of people who believed in kindness and second chances. Miss Mirren embodies those values. The position is hers if she wants it. No pressure, no obligation. Just an offer from someone who knows what it's like to need a chance to prove the world wrong. Respectfully, Adrian Hale. Elena stared at the letter, unable to process what she was reading. You're opening a clinic, she finally managed. I'm trying to do something good with what's left of my life. Isabel and Tommy deserve to be honored with more than my self-destruction. This feels right. He paused. But only if you're part of it. I don't want to do this without you. Adrian, I don't know what to say. It's incredible. But are you sure? Starting something like this, putting yourself back in the world. I'm terrified, he admitted. But I'm ready to be terrified and alive instead of safe and dead. You taught me that. Let me give you a place where you can teach it to others. Eleanor looked at the journal, the evidence, the job offer. Everything she'd lost, being handed back to her by the man she'd refused to give up on. There's a condition, she said finally. What? You have to be part of it too. Not just funding it from a distance. Actually there, actually present. You don't get to hide anymore. Adrian's expression flickered with fear, then resolve. Deal. And Margaret gets to be involved somehow. Maybe a memorial garden? Something living to honor Isabel and Tommy. I'd already planned on asking her. Eleanor smiled through her tears. Then yes, I'll do it. I'll help you build something beautiful from all this pain. They shook hands formally, then laughed at the absurdity of it. This wasn't a business transaction. This was two people who'd saved each other making a pact to keep saving others. When do we start? Elena asked. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. That's how you build a future. One day at a time. That night, Elena sat in her room, reading through the evidence Adrian had compiled. Every page was a vindication she'd thought she'd never receive. Every document was proof that she'd been right to keep believing in her own innocence. But more than that, it was proof that Adrian had been right too. That people could change, could heal, could transform from victims into survivors, from monsters into healers. She picked up her phone and did something she hadn't done in 6 months. She called her mother. Eleanor. Her mother's voice was shocked. Sweetheart, is everything all right? Yes, Mom. Actually, yes, everything is finally all right. I have so much to tell you. And for the first time since St. Catherine's, she believed it. 6 months later, the Catherine Hale Memorial Clinic opened its doors. It occupied a renovated building on the edge of town. Not grand, but warm, welcoming. The kind of place where people felt safe, bringing their pain because they knew it would be honored, not judged. Eleanor stood at the entrance on opening day, watching as the first patients arrived. An elderly man with no insurance, a single mother whose child needed care she couldn't afford, a young veteran with scars that matched Adrian's, some visible, some not. They came because they'd heard about the clinic that turned no one away. The place run by two people who understood what it meant to need second chances. Adrian was inside, greeting patients personally. He still bore his scars, still carried grief in the set of his shoulders, but he moved through the world now as himself, not hiding, not performing, just existing as a man who'd been broken and was learning to live with the cracks. Margaret had designed the garden, a beautiful space filled with roses, benches, and a fountain with Isabel's and Tommy's names carved into stone. Not a grave, but a celebration. A place where people could sit and remember that love persists beyond death. The local newspaper had done a story. From tragedy to healing, the unlikely rebirth of Adrian Hale. The article told the truth, all of it. Vincent's role, Adrian's sacrifice, Elena's redemption. It had been controversial, shocking, painful, but it had also been necessary. The truth had set them both free even when freedom hurt. Now, watching Adrian kneel to speak with a frightened child, Elena felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the naive kind that believes everything will be perfect. The earned kind that knows everything is broken, but worth fixing anyway. Beautiful, isn't it? She turned to find Margaret beside her, eyes on the garden. It is, Elena agreed. They would have loved this, Margaret said softly. Isabel always wanted Adrian to use his wealth for good, and Tommy would have been so proud, thinking his daddy was a superhero saving people. He kind of is, Elena said. Margaret smiled. So are you, dear, so are you. They stood together in comfortable silence, 3 survivors learning to honor the dead by choosing to live. That evening, after the last patient had left and the clinic was quiet, Adrian found Elena in her office. I was thinking, he said, about what you said the first day you came to Ashwood, that everyone deserves someone who still believes they can be saved. I remember. I don't think I ever said thank you for being that person for me. You don't have to thank me. You did the same for me. No, he shook his head. You came to care for the man they called a monster and found someone who just wanted forgiveness. You gave me that. You gave me back my humanity. That's not something I'll ever be able to repay. You already have. Elena gestured around the clinic. Every person who walks through these doors and gets care, they couldn't get anywhere else. That's payment enough. Adrian smiled, and in that smile Elena saw the final transformation. Not from monster to man. That had happened months ago. This was something deeper, from survivor to healer. From someone who'd been saved to someone who saves others. I've been writing again, he said. Not letters this time, something bigger. The full story of what happened. Vincent, the fire, everything. I'm thinking of publishing it. Are you ready for that? The publicity, the questions? No, but I'm doing it anyway, because there are other people out there like us. People who've been called monsters for things they didn't do. People drowning in guilt that isn't theirs to carry. If our story helps even one of them, it's worth it. Elena nodded. Then I'll help you. We'll tell it together. Deal. They walked out together into the spring evening. The garden glowed softly in the dusk, and somewhere in the distance, children were laughing. A sound that would have broken Adrian once, but now made him smile. Do you think they forgive me? He asked quietly, looking at the fountain with Isabel's and Tommy's names. Really forgive me? I think they never blamed you in the first place, Elena said. I think forgiveness is something we give ourselves, Adrian, and you've finally started to do that. He nodded slowly. What about you? Have you forgiven yourself for what happened at St. Catherine's? Elena considered this, the patient who died, the accusations, the year of hell that followed. She'd gotten her reputation back, her career restored, but the wound remained and she suspected it always would. I'm working on it, she said honestly. Every day, a little bit more. Every patient I help, every life I touch. It reminds me that one mistake doesn't define me, even if it wasn't my mistake to begin with. We're quite the pair, aren't we? 2 people learning to forgive themselves for being human. The best kind of pair, Elena said, smiling. They said goodnight at the parking lot. Elena watched Adrian drive away back to Ashwood Manor, no longer a tomb but a home. He'd invited her to dinner there next week with Margaret. They were becoming something like family, bound not by blood, but by shared survival. As Elena drove home herself, she thought about monsters and men, about guilt and grace, about the fine line between destroying yourself and saving yourself. She thought about a man who'd been called a monster, and chosen to believe it because it was easier than believing he deserved to live. She thought about herself, destroyed by lies and learning slowly to rebuild on truth. And she thought about forgiveness, not as an event but as a practice, something you choose every day, even when it's hard, even when you don't feel worthy. The radio played softly as she drove, a song about redemption, about second chances, about love that persists beyond reason. Elena sang along, her voice soft but steady, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she believed the words. The end. They called him a monster. But I saw the man who only wanted to be human again. In the end, we all want the same thing. Someone who sees what the world has given up on. Someone who refuses to let us disappear. We are not defined by our worst moments, our deepest mistakes, or the lies others tell about us. We are defined by what we do after the fall, by whether we choose to stay broken or fight to be whole. Forgiveness is not about forgetting. It's about remembering we deserve to live despite the pain. This is the story of a man called a monster and a woman called a failure. But really, it's a story about two people who refused to accept those names. And in refusing, they saved each other.